Hello YouTube, I'm back with another build video, and this one is not about Excalibur, at least not exclusively. This is about building your Kavat, or your companion, but really a Kavat, and we'll get into that, on how you can get it to kill Thrax Ghosts and hit in the millions. So if you've seen my previous clip showing hitting in the millions on Thrax Ghosts, I'm going to show you how to do that. And the important thing I want to mention is, yes, I make Excalibur build videos, but this is not unique to Excalibur in pretty much every way. There's only just one requirement that makes it convenient on Excalibur, but you can make an argument it's better on Rhino, and I'll show you how to do it. So getting right into it, there's going to be some important things to understand about doing damage to Thraxes or Thrax Ghosts with your companion. The most important thing to understand is Astral Bond does do that. It allows your companion to do void damage that does affect Thrax Ghosts. And so this is how the build works. It's using this mod specifically. And then there's ways to buff it. So I'll start sort of back and then work in. Now, the reason I'm using a Kavat, and specifically an Adarza Kavat, is because things like the, let's say, the Kubros don't actually hit them. So they struggle. Something about their default melee range is not sufficient for them to hit the ghosts. So there might be some scenarios where they can hit it, but in my testing, they don't have the range to actually hit the ghosts. So then out of beast options, really you're left with Kavats. And out of the Kavats, the one that performs the best by far is Adarza. And the reason is if you look at the base crit and crit damage, the other Kavats do well, but the crit damage scaling that occurs with Astral Bond and how much void damage it does to the Thraxes is large. So I would highly recommend, you can experiment, but I would highly recommend using sort of almost this exact build that I'll be showing. I'll show some flexibility within it. Knowing what buffs it, I think, is more important, and then building the rest of it around what you prefer. Let's say if you're not using Excalibur and you're using some of the other Warframes and subsume abilities that I'll talk about that do buff it, there's probably some better options. It's just I play Excalibur, so I'll show you Excalibur and discuss what I'm using on Excalibur to do it. So getting into this, I'll list the things that do dramatically buff the damage. So obviously you need this in order to do it, in order for it to work in its entirety. Fierce Sense. This plus 200% is multiplicative to it. Not every damage bonus is multiplicative to it. Some of the ones I'll point out is like, where is it? Things like Sharpened Claw. So this 300% damage and such. This doesn't appear to work whenever I was testing it. It doesn't appear like this attack is coded as the void damage necessary. It seems like base attacks are the only ones that do it. Same thing with Pounce. I didn't have any sort of noticeable change in the damage it was outputting in Simulacrum, and then also within real missions, like within real Void Cascades. So this one, very good. It doesn't have absolute uptime, but it's noticeable. The little circle that shows in the tooltip, it'll pulse this circle around when it's active, and then you can tell it's active too from the damage numbers. This does not work. This is because of one of the optional slots that I'll show why I'm using this and what Excalibur build I'm using for this specifically. This is probably the biggest one. So what lets beasts sort of outperform, let's say, Sentinels, is the fact that this is multiplicative. So when you're playing a melee only build, the melee hits give combo counter is actually really good. And there's a way that this is even better as like a companion part of your build for a melee only build that I'll show with what I use for my subsume in this build. And but this is multiplicative, so 330%. The very important thing to understand about Tandem Bond is it doesn't work like Incarnon evolutions, where you don't actually have to hit anything with the melee or with the heavy attack for you to proc the Incarn evolution. So it's one of those where, like, let's say you kill enemies in front of you, you get a Tenekai proc, you need to proc Incarnon for your melee weapon, and you just heavy attack, doesn't consume combo, but it procs it. That does not work here. So you actually have to hit an enemy in order for this to proc. And when we talk about Excalibur and let's say Exalted Blade, it's really easy to proc because of the waves. Otherwise, this can be kind of hit or miss. This does also get overridden by lower values. So if you're not running a build that's maintaining 12 by 220, then you will get a nerf on this. Either way, though, even if you're running like a heavy attack spam build or Dex Nakana built out for 11x just by default, that's still really good. The uptime on this can be perfect depending on your build, and sometimes it can be pretty awful. Momentous Bond, I don't believe this actually does buff it, but this is part of the builds that I run. This is really good. It's a really good way of buffing the damage overall of your Kavat in just normal attacks. Same thing with like Seismic Bond and its wave feature. But so this is not applicable to the builds, but I would still recommend it either way. The recovery time and everything is really good. This does not do anything for your companion. This is just a convenient. This is one of the flexible slots. This is practically required. One of the other things that if you wanted to increase the survivability as Reflect is actually really good for survivability on your Kavat. Notice I'm not using Cat's Eye because this isn't really a build about buffing your Warframe. It's more of a build about buffing your buffing your companion. So that's where like this is a flexible slot. But out of between these two, the reduced companion time is useful in comparison to this, and this doesn't apply to everything. That's why I just running Tenacious Bond there instead. But you could run Reflect and then get more survivability in your companion. This is just really good. I would use this over one of the other reasons why Kavats are really good for this. Prime Pack Leader, if you're running this build to be able to maximize Tandem Bond, this is going to be proccing. This also got a pretty good buff recently with the Tekra Encore because Pseudo Exalteds used to not proc this. Pseudo Exalteds do proc this now. So it's a easy way for you to be able to maintain this in a build, in most of the builds I run that are effectively doing almost all of its melee damage in my build, except for like Radio Javelin. You're gonna run this. It's just not optional. And then same thing with Resource Retriever. If you're running a beast, these two are just, you don't need them for some reason, then there's not really many better options other than other buffs. But more like Prime, I don't care for this. So there's some flexibility within this. If like Duplex Bond, this one does not buff or does not receive the Astral Bond bonuses, and it doesn't receive a lot of the other bonuses like Tandem Bond. So these really don't do that much damage. But if you need the extra energy, this might be one of your flex slots in order to be able to get that. Same thing with, where is it? One of the other Hunter mods. If you're running like a different variation of my build, this one's a good option too. This can keep your Warframe alive quite nicely. If you're using a combination of like this and Brief Respite with a decent energy drain, then it's a pretty good feature there. This is a other good mod just in general to throw on this build because that armor strip is noticeable against heavy enemies. Like if you're going against demolitions and you're using similar setup, then this will guarantee that that demolition unit does not have any armor. If it's like a MOA or some of the more tankier units, that armor stripping is pretty massive still, even post Jade Shadows. This is a obvious easy one. If there's some things to note about this too, like I believe I've been able to isolate that Reflect does proc this. It does count as like injured damage from companion, and then the same with some of the other stance mods that I don't recommend for this, but it is an option. The one where it staggers enemies around it appears to also proc it. It's so hard to isolate these things, but just in like testing them out of drops that happen, those do seem to apply. This is not necessary for the build. It's another reason not to run Cat's Eye, because Cat's Eye is a lot better with this extra 30% duration. So if you're not running Cat's Eye, there's no reason to run this. And then this is a more fringe option. I would between these two, Sharpened Claws I think is better than Vicious Bond most of the time. The enemies that don't die immediately. The thing to note about Vicious Bond, if you do run it, it does proc off of things like Radio Javelin, which is pretty good, but just not as useful as a lot of other mods. Getting into the actual weapon damage or the claws, Assassin's Posture. So this does a really good job at telling the companion to prioritize the ghosts when they're up. If you don't run this, it's quite noticeable that the companion or that your Kavat doesn't go for the ghosts as much, and you ideally don't want to be letting them live too long. Part of the advantage this gives is that you can pretty much stay out of operator when we trying to kill ghosts, and just kind of let your companion do it. Like, kill everything around it and then let your companion just sort of handle the ghosts. It's kind of the idea behind it. And this, I think, is also really good when you combine it with like Magnetic Strike and Bell Ringer, because then you're allowing your companion to like do an insane amount of overguard damage, applying magnetic and its feature on overguarded targets, and then some like extra impacts so that you can get faster, like get that increased window, the increased health window for, speaking of Kavats, here's my cat. Here's my Kavat. So you can get that increased window, or that like increased health window for doing mercy kills. And if you happen to run that, or if you need it for extra energy regeneration, if you have the energy orbs and those sorts of mod for your repairs on. Some things to note about this is optional. I don't think heat is required, but it's just what I kind of prefer right now. It helps with the armor reduction. It's one of the better ones, but you can run whichever one you want. If you have a specific one that you prefer, it kind of doesn't matter. It obviously doesn't affect Thrax Ghosts since they're immune to like status effects in that way. The other really good reason why Kavats are just better in general is this swipe mod procs on multiple targets. So you'll see it'll actually swipe multiple Thrax Ghosts and hit multiple Thrax Ghosts with that. It also helps buff Tandem Bond, because every time I've tested it, it appears that it procs multiple times based on swipe. So if your swipe hits like 2 targets, you don't get just 1 hit of Tandem Bond to give you combo. You actually get multiple. The thing that took me way too long to realize is that you can put on these brute conditioning mods, or the melee damage convert, and also the elemental ones simultaneously. And just to show why you do that is you get that 385% melee damage no matter what. So you're just stacking tons of base damage on this, between like increasing the crit like crazy, brute, burning, like maul. You're just really sending that base damage as high as you possibly can, and it's noticeable. The thing I don't use in this, that if you were really min-maxing this build or not running a melee focus build, and you weren't a weirdo like me who kind of ignores equipping primaries and secondaries the vast majority of the time, where is it? This guy. So if you do run a primary and you run a really high, I'll just show this real quick too. So if you're running like a really high crit primary weapon, the one I've been using is like my Dread, since I've got like a pretty decent Riven to run this. Acuity doesn't apply, but it's pretty high up there. And I've even switched it over to running this when I think normally I would be running the +1 1x. But if we go back to our companion, notice how we're into potential red crit territory, and that does scale. It seems to about double based on the scaling on it. At least double the damage when you get to the next crit tier. So this is, if you really wanted to min-max it, that's probably the way to do it. Do you really need the magnetic impact combination for this? No, but it's a really, I think it's such a nice combination between these two for normal build, that like you don't need to hit the Thrax Ghosts for 10 million damage. You could, but you don't need to. So I don't really see the advantage of sending that to the moon. So that's the Kavat build. Now I'll talk about some ways that you can buff this from your Warframe, and why this isn't exclusive to Excalibur at all. The only thing that's really required for this to function is this combination between Prime Pack Leader to keep your companion alive, and then Tandem Bond that you're using a melee, at least melee combat quite continuously to be able to keep it alive and to keep this bonus up. Yeah, this bonus lasts for 30 seconds, but your companion's probably not staying alive unless you're really relying on Tech Assault's more than likely chance to ignore a lethal damage and make it immune. So That's where while this thing is ideally trying to kill your Thrax Ghosts, you're meleeing, whether that's with an Exalted melee weapon or a Pseudo-Exalted or just your regular melee combat. This is quite powerful in that way. Now my Warframe build. Let me make sure I actually fix that. Yeah, so we're good. This Thrax, this uses the spirit of a lot of my other builds. The spirit of it. So this was one thing I was testing recently on ways to buff this, but ways to buff your companion. So the most obvious one that I'll point out right off the rip is the aura. This Summoner's Wrath. So the 75% companion summon damage. Supposedly this is coded similar to faction damage, where it applies to like roar and stacks additively with roar. This is good. This is good to use. If you can fit this in your build, let's say if you're not running Excalibur, you're running someone like Rhino or Valkyrie, and I mentioned those two specifically for a reason. And you're running this mod, that is probably the best way to do it. So run this mod, run someone that can do either apply roar or Warcry, and I'll explain why Warcry. Because roar buffs that Astral Bond by quite a lot. So if you're able to get really high roar, that's where like Rhino's really good for it. And then also someone like when you're using Valkyrie to get Warcry, because Warcry increases the attack speed. And in my testing, increasing the attack speed is almost as effective as increasing its damage, because you're just making it more likely to actually hit targets. So I would even make the argument that Warcry is actually better overall, because if you're doing a melee build, in order to maintain those other two buffs, like Pack Leader and Tandem Bond, this is going to dramatically increase your effectiveness in running a melee-only build, whether that's an Exalted or even like a Glaive, and you're doing like a heavy attack with the Glaive with a high initial combo, like whatever works for you. But this, I would argue, is probably better. And the other reason why is when you can use something like Eternal Roar in order to just keep that up continuously. And you don't even need duration to make it work. Like the 40-second max duration is just so good that if you don't have another build that really requires extra duration, like I don't think Radio Javelin really needs extra duration most of the time. That 16 seconds is going to let you kill all the enemies, and then next pack of enemies that are big, you get another buff. I digress, but Warcry really good. Same thing with Roar, and that's where I'm not going to test it, and I hope someone watching this video is a Rhino melee only main that can really explore this and see how ridiculous it can get. Since Rhino's overguard mechanic and the fact that he also has shields is just really good for. It's always been a point of contention with melee only builds that I've been playing literally since the beta, where Rhino was kind of this. If you wanted lower risk to reward, like less mobility, even back in the beta, it was like Rhino or Excalibur. Excalibur had far better mobility with like base stamina and with super jump. Yeah, for those that don't know those mechanics that used to exist, feel free to look those up. Excalibur was really good at that, and then Rhino was always this option of, well, you can just, like, if you want a lower risk, you want to just be tanky as hell, being really good melee only. So if you're able to combine Warcry and Roar in that scenario using Rhino, that's probably the best option overall. And then similarly, if you've got Warcry to give your companion that attack speed, you could put Roar on Valkyrie, and then if it lets you, I don't know, I don't play Valkyrie that much, but if you run like Warcry and Roar, that's the best ways to do it. A lot of things that don't buff it, things like obviously Zada, I don't believe Eclipse did, or any of the other subsumes, so it's like really just Roar that I was able to find that buffs it, and it buffs it by like a lot more than anything else that I tested. If it did buff it, I forget off the top of my head. So those would be the two options, Roar and Warcry. I think Warcry, if you're running Excalibur, is just overall better. The advantage of Warcry as well with this build, this is just a slight variation of my radiation build. I'm running this because if you are running Warcry and you're running it with something like, and some of the other versions of my build, like my Afflictions build and not an Influence one like this, you actually would be wanting to run it on with triple Umbral mods. So to give everyone who doesn't have Excalibur Prime, sort of my recommendation for this is if you want to run Affliction, it scales better with the mod slots you have available. To run it with triple Umbral mods, you really need to run this because every time you're popping in and out of Operator in order to proc Astral Bond, I'll show you the best way to proc Astral Bond as well. You'd actually need this for the build to function. Otherwise, you're recasting Warcry all the time. It sucks, but it is what it is. And in order to compensate for that, I have Unaru on this build. As usual, when I run Warrior's Rest, I run Unaru. It solves so many problems. You get the defensiveness, you get really easy last grasp, everything like that. You get the wisp damage increase on your amp, so you can still buff if you decide to use your operator on Void Cascades and you're not just going to let your companion do all the work. That's the way to do that. And then this is very similar. Thing I'll note about here, for those that have run my Afflictions build in the past, one thing I would recommend trying out and seeing if you like it is you can run Dispatch Overdrive and heavy attack spam with this build. With the low attack speed because of Spoiled Strike and such, it makes Exalted Blade kind of difficult to use in general. Not with Warcry as much. With Warcry it kind of solves that, but without Warcry, instead of running the Galvanized mod, just give it the extra status damage that elemental the status chance really doesn't matter for the Afflictions build. So getting that extra heavy attack wind up speed and then just throwing on Organ Shatter. So it's not really a heavy attack build and you don't really need combo for it either for it to do well because of the fact that the heavy attack cross waves fling. So then you're really doing heavy attack damage through Affliction on enemies. And it's good enough to where if you do need to pull out Exalted Blade for my Afflictions build, just run this variation, including potentially just running Dispatch Overdrive instead of Merit. And it's a far more useful version of Exalted Blade when you need to do it without having to compromise on modding and really being a buff, because that extra 10% status damage is going to be far better than 120 status chance. And then giving it a little bit of crit for a build that has more likely chance to crit than not to crit with the mod configuration here. That would be my recommendation. So this just being another variation of this. I'm not going to get too deep into exactly what I use for each of these Excalibur builds because it's not the focus of this build. To lightly put this, I'll just sort of briefly show this. Obviously, Electric Emissive. This takes the same concepts as my Radiation, Universal Fallout, Afflictions, or Influence build. Same exact concepts, just max quality of life. Surging Dash, just because we're running Vazarin, because overall, Vazarin is better for this. You can run it on Umbra if you want. You don't get the knockdown immunity, but you still, when you're Vazarin immune, you're also knockdown immune, so it kind of doesn't matter, to be honest. Because you want to be able to use this on your companion, and the easiest way to proc this buff is why this is also really good. I'll cover this because Operator is important here. What I use is a 747, and I use this mod configuration. You don't always get amp plus damage, but I found that using this with a 747 is better than the amp damage. The more important part of this is Magus Cloud, because the way that we proc Astral Bond the easiest is actually using Magus Cloud. So we'll go into Simulacrum, and I'll show this in Simulacrum. If you don't trust that this works in normal missions, try it yourself. It's pretty simple to test with Astral Bond. It's kind of annoying showing those numbers in a real mission. The fact that you can not hit the enemies at all with your operator, and the Thrax Ghosts die, and you can kind of sometimes see like, oh yeah, it hit like 4 million on this Thrax Ghost. It's kind of all the validation you need to see. In this build, this is a little fun trick with Hate Incarnon. This is like I might as well show the Hate Incarnon build while we're here. This one's a little unique. This bonus does apply to Surging Dash, which is really cool. It's the only one of all of them that does this. I cover this in my melee weapon guide to Excalibur. It's a really cool feature that way. And this is similar to what I showed in that build, which is actually running Vortex. So because I'm running Influence on my blade, My Exalted Blade, I'm not going to run Influence on this. It's kind of dumb also because you want to be able to have Heat innate to be able to proc this. And really high attack speed on this. You throw those projectiles, the projectiles start grouping enemies up and doing explosions, applying that heat status damage to be able to innately proc this. It's a really fun combo. With the extra attack speed from Warcry, this is a lot of fun. If you were going to get a replacement for this Riven, just run either Heat or Condition Overload, whatever it is you want. It kind of doesn't matter. This is just what I run for it. This gets me over 300% crit chance, normal attacks with the +6 and +12 or +10. So just matter of opinions there. It's all so much more than what's necessary to kill even level cap. Okay. So what I'll show first is you'll be able to see like how much hit, like how much this is hitting. So pretty good. The shockwave is part of that too, but then when I give it Warcry, you can see that it is in fact attacking a little bit faster, about twice as fast, and that is really good when it comes to trying to maintain this battle. So I'll kill all these enemies, turn them to ghosts, and then I'll show you, see it's hitting 0 damage, and the way I like to proc this is when you're running Bazarin, you Void Sling through them, you give your operator immunity, and then you can see it's hitting pretty hard. And I do in fact have the buff up, 360%, and now it's expired. So if you're doing this, you're also applying that immunity to your Kavat, increasing its damage. This isn't hitting like in the crazy millions like I showed in my other video because I'm not running Roar. I'm also running lower strength without Roar. So it's an option. If you really wanted to send this like crazy, just run Rhino. It'd be really good. You just do the same thing. Apply your Overguard while you're doing this. The thing to note is it did expire. It's maintaining my combo. Notice that too. Unfortunately, I can't apply this buff. Notice how I'm not getting the buff, the 360%, because it doesn't proc on Thrax Ghosts. So we'll just let him finish these guys off. Just show my amp works perfectly fine, but and Universal or Universal Fallout was dropping orbs with those guys. That was kind of cool. Didn't expect that. Okay, so what we're gonna do here. And make sure I get full combo before they all die. Heavy attack. The waves do proc it. So we're just going to keep doing this. Which is something you kind of want to do during these missions because you're making all your friends immune as well with Bazarin. Notice the differences in damage based on when that's proccing. You'll be able to slow down and see what kind of values are hitting. This gets a lot better if you ran like Rhino with Warcry. So I'd recommend trying that for those that aren't weird Excalibur only mains like me. I guess if you want to see, well, we can see how much I've played Rhino. Yeah, there's Rhino. So I think normal Rhino is even lower. I don't even know at this point. So yeah, I don't play Rhino. I don't play Valkyrie. Valkyrie just getting a rework is really good for that. The changes to Warcry make this a lot better. I've been reluctant to use Warcry on most of my builds because I like slash dash, but in this case, I've been able to really stretch its legs. The other thing to know is Warcry now scales off of affinity range, and Bazarin does get an advantage there. So you might just kind of want to run it in general if you want to be able to give your teammates, or if your companion happens to be another 25 meters past the like 50 or 55 meter base range on affinity range or affinity radius. So just something to consider. There's a lot of flexibility here, but really to recap, the important things are like some of these multiplicative bonuses, making sure you have this and that you're proccing it reliably. Tandem Bond is really what makes this work, what makes it go from like, oh, that's kind of good damage, to being like, oh boy, that's actually like level cap Thrax Ghost viable, and then some of the other bonuses that you can get with your subsumes and Warframe abilities. So yeah, if you have any questions, if you have anything that you're able to test, if anyone does actually want to run this on Rhino with Warcry subsumed on them and then really send this to the moon, I'd be curious to see that. That'd be and how effective that is. Just turning your Kavat into a genocidal maniac on both fronts, even on the Thrax Ghost front. So yeah, thanks for watching.